I'm Adria Sharp. I'm the director of the Richmond Peace Education Center. I am completely losing my voice, so please bear with me, but I really very much wanted to sort of croak out a welcome and an introduction. I'm so excited about tonight's event. We are so glad to see each and every one of you here tonight on this beautiful evening. Thank you for coming and to be part of this discussion with us, this very important discussion, and for prioritizing it. We are so fortunate to have with us tonight a very special person, Kethy Kelly. Our society tends to hold up and honor our war makers. We have with us tonight a great peacemaker who I really consider an American hero. She has worked for decades proactively for peace, traveling to war-torn countries, really putting her body on the line courageously in her work for nonviolence to build a more peaceful world. I know of no other U.S. peace activist who has spent as much time as she has in Afghanistan over the past year or so. And tonight we're going to be focusing on Afghanistan. We're now entering our 10th year of war in Afghanistan. Kethy has been there, I think, about 4 times in the past year. She's there often, traveling with peace delegations, building connections with civilian groups that are working for peace. And she just returned from her last trip to Afghanistan literally a few days ago. Although we've been at war in Afghanistan for 10 years, we really don't hear unembedded civilian perspectives from the ground. We don't hear enough about the impact of the war on the communities there, or people's perspectives there. We don't know enough about their life experience. And there's no better time for us to be having this discussion as our President Barack Obama committed in 2009 to begin a troop drawdown in July 2010. And it's unclear at this point, I'm sorry, July 2011, so literally in a few months. It's unclear at this point what that will really mean. And the administration has begun to kind of lower expectations of the extent of that troop drawdown. We're also watching as our Congress is really savaging our social safety nets and such without really discussing critically the kind of spending that we're doing day after day in our wars overseas. So there's no better time than now to be having this discussion. I wanted to, before I introduce Kethy, just quickly point out the display of combat boots and civilian shoes that we have up here. And if you have a moment after our event tonight, I really encourage you to come up and take a look at this display. It's the Eyes Wide Open Virginia display, which the Richmond Peace Education Center co-coordinates together with the Richmond Friends meeting. And it's a display designed to encourage critical reflection about the human cost of war. It includes 43 pairs of combat boots, each tagged with the name, age, hometown, and military rank of a Virginian who has lost his or her life in Afghanistan in the war. It also includes civilian shoes tagged with the names of Afghan civilians who have died. We coordinate this display statewide, so it's will be held all over the state. We also coordinate an Iraq version of the display, which has been held in 16 or 17 different sites across the state. And it's completely free to any host group who's interested in having this display as a way to encourage your community to literally almost stumble upon the boots and walk amongst the boots. And again, to encourage that dialogue and reflection about the human cost of war. So I want to very quickly just thank the groups that have worked with us here to make tonight happen. Bonner Presbyterian Church Peace Study Action Group, Midlothian Friends Meeting Peace Social Action Committee, Pax Christi Richmond, Richmond Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality, Richmond Friends Meeting, Richmond Mennonite Fellowship, and the Wayside Center. And also a special thank you to Nancy Gowan. Somewhere, where's Nancy? Nancy. Thank you. Nancy Gowan, who knows Kethy from her own peace work and who really is a hero in her own right and a peacemaker. Also to students, Hillary, Angelica, Delia, Lucy, Sarah, and the VCU Students for Democratic Society, to everyone else here who has spread the word, and thank you again all for coming out tonight. To stay involved and to be part of future anti-war peace and global justice work of the Peace Center and other partner groups, please give us your name and contact information. We'd love to stay in touch with you and involve you. And this is just the first step. Let's consider tonight's discussion just the first step of our commitment to work for a more peaceful world. We also would welcome your donations. I was reminded to say this, in any amount to help cover the cost of tonight's program, including an honorarium for our guest to help support her incredibly important continued work. So the format today is we'll hear from Kethy for maybe 30 or 40 minutes, then we'll have a lot of time for a question and answer. And with that, please help me welcome Kethy Kelly, co-coordinator of Voices for Creative Development.
To be here. I look forward to coming, and I'm very, very grateful for the hospitality experience so far, both last evening at the Mennonite Church, here today with the Richmond Peace Center's fine organizing to gather us all, and certainly I was especially happy to be at the Open High School and to dart over to Charlottesville. And we're also very fortunate because there's representation tonight from the Afghan Student Association. Karishma, do you mind to just stand up and turn around quickly? I've often known it's important to remind myself that, you know, a youngster in the bazaar selling roasted peanuts will always know more than I could ever know about Afghanistan, or earlier the same would have been true about Iraq. But you have access here in your community to someone who's a treasure, really, in terms of both personal experience and I could tell she has stayed on top of the issues in a very empathetic and compassionate way. When we have so much security here and we try to understand the realities faced by people bearing the brunt of our wars, it really requires a great deal of insight and readiness to take on complication, and so we're just very fortunate to have you here tonight, and I know we'll be hearing more from Karishma. I want to say maybe a few things by way of introduction about myself. The writer Saul Bellow once described the neighborhood where I grew up as rows and rows of bungalows and scrawny little parks, and he had it about exactly right. If anybody came from a more ordinary background than mine, it would actually be frightening. So I was fortunate over time to be exposed to some quite wonderful peacemakers, but I could say, I suppose by way of confession, that I went through the Vietnam War like Brigadoon in the mist, sort of in a cloud of unknowing. And I remember at one point, some students did invite me to come and be part of a peace action type event, and as I declined and then walked away, I clearly remember saying to my housemate, Marianne, oh, I don't know, maybe they don't have anything better to do. Ooh, so I deserved a year in prison when I finally got it, but it wasn't quite terrific for that. I had it coming. So I wasn't somebody who became involved at an early date, that's for sure. There's something else I want to tell you from those college years. Again, I feel confessional looking at university students. I made it through Loyola University during the time when you could actually graduate with your overdue library fine, and that was all the debt that you owed. And now, you know, people are graduating like indentured servants, and I think, what have we done in our society? I'm sorry. But in order to graduate with just your overdue library fine, you did have to work your part-time jobs and your full-time summer job. And my full-time summer job was Rose Packing Company. My sister had the evening shift, and she told me, oh, Kethy, hardly have to do anything. So that sounded very good to me. I could make 13 cents more than I was making at Continental Bank, so I quit Continental for 13 cents an hour more. And the daytime job description could be summed up in one word: slinging. And so I remember walking onto the factory floor. There were 3 machines going at once, and the huge concatenation of noise and smell was rancid and horrible, and there were pools of blood and little bits of meat floating in the pools of blood. I thought, what has my sister done to me? And I was given a milk crate to stand on, and a long yellow rubber apron, and a long white frock, and I noticed nobody's white frock was staying white for very long, and rubber gloves and combat boots, and I had a long T-hook kind of thing with a big hook at the end, and like I said, the job description was one word: sling. So you kind of had to sling your hook through the air and stab a pork loin, and and the pork loins were in a vat, and they were sort of starting to thaw, but if you gave a good jerk, you could pick the pork loin up in the air and then sling it onto the conveyor belt so that it would go through the pickle juice machine, which would also squirt pickle juice in my eyes, and the blood is dripping down my arm, and after the first hour I thought, maybe if I go through the Latin Mass one more time, I can get through this, and I then went through every memorized poem I'd ever had in my head, and then I was going through whatever kinds of games I could play to keep my mind alive. I mean, 8 hours later, my body was aching, and I thought, how will I do this? And then sometimes I'd be taken off of slinging, and I'd be put onto the section of the factory where you did what my sister did in the evening. You just had to press a lever, and that would splat some of the waste material from the floor into plastic tubing. And that's how they made sausages at Rose Packing Company. So yes, I became a vegetarian. And the reason I tell you this long story is because I don't know why, but in January of 2009, I had something like an epiphany moment. And prior to that time, if anyone had said to me, Kethy Kelly, you slaughtered animals, I would have, I know, said, oh, you've got the wrong Kethy Kelly. There are a lot of Kethy Kellys. I'm a city person all my life. I never killed an animal in my life. But somehow, January 2009, I don't quite know why, it dawned on me, oh yes, I was part and parcel of slaughter of animals. Now, I have actually some strong feelings about industrial factory slaughter of animals. But that's not why I tell you all this. What I want to say is it took me a good 30 years to come to the realization that I was part of a killing process, and for years I never ever would have seen that as part of who I am. And I think one of the reasons that came up from my subconscious into my conscious was because I've been thinking so much, as I'm sure many of you have, about the fact that our country's been at war for 10 years. In a war that we've just about forgotten about as a nation. The war goes on. And will it take us 30 years to reckon with the fact that we've been involved in slaughter steadily for 10 long, agonizing years in a country full of people who meant us no harm? And so I asked myself, how can we start to tell truths about Afghanistan that aren't so likely to be put front and center before us in our mainstream media, in our faith-based groups, in our universities. And yet I think we have a great need to come to grip with some of these truths. And one of the ones that's so difficult to wrap one's mind around, you know, for years we worked on the economic sanctions against Iraq, and we were painfully conscious that those economic sanctions had directly contributed to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of children under age 5. So the first time I read in March of 2010 a United Nations statistic quoted by Save the Children that 850 Afghan children die every single day, I thought, it's got to be a typo. It has to be a mistake. And I went Googling and checked and double-checked, and that's the statistic. Every single day, 850 Afghan children die. And for those who survive, 1 out of 5 doesn't make it past age 5. And I can tell you that the first time I went to a refugee camp, a squalid, wretched, horrific place in Kabul, the kids went and got the elders from the camp, and they were all half my age. Because the average life expectancy, you see, is 44 years of age. In fact, let me correct that. I was sitting with a medical student during this last trip, and she said very calmly, oh no, actually this year for women it's 42.2, and for men it's 42.6. That's the average life expectancy. So if you're 25 years old in Afghanistan today, you're in your advanced mid-years. So the kids went and got their elders, and what looked to me like some fairly younger men came, and you could understand that they just had to express their anger somewhere. And here I was, an American, And so it wasn't even a breach of hospitality. The guy just wanted me to know that he was